I remember when I first came out to teach, I was teaching in a pretty low pending school. So obviously students were not particularly good academically and not very good in English. I taught English. And in that school, I chose that school because they have English literature. But unfortunately, it's the worst class which was put to learn English literature, because the better class will be learning science. So I started my first year teaching one Form 4 class for English literature, teaching 3 English classes, which was pretty heavy load. I was the form teacher of a Form 3 class, and that's 3A, which was the better class than 3D, for example. I didn't have training for teaching English then. I only had the BA, and my BA was in English literature and philosophy. And so I have to work out how to teach English all on my own. I remember I relied a bit on a textbook, but because I was taking a PGD at that time, so I did have the idea that I needed to do a lot more activities with the students. So I tried my best. I remember going to the library, since I have to go back for my PGD classes. So I went to Hong Kong U Library, got some books on activities and even dictation activities, and I tried whatever I could. I remember I was teaching, there was a Form 2 class that I was teaching, and I think my problems with the students were that they were not, they were not bad, but they did challenge teachers, particularly when they met somebody like me who they could tell is all new and small and short. So I remember for one Form 2 class that I was teaching, at the end of the class, one of the boys who was taller than me, which is pretty easy, he came to me and asked me, "How tall are you?" I don't think he meant anything bad, but I was taken a bit, shocked. That's a shock to me. And without much experience, I didn't know how to respond at all. And I just smiled at him, and luckily he let me go. And I felt relieved. So, but today, if I got a question like that, then of course I know how to answer that question, which is quality matters. But I think I can classify my problems into mainly 2. One is that I needed to really learn how to teach the language, or how to help the students to learn the language on my own quite a lot. And I must say that the PGD course didn't help too much. It's not too practical. And I remember having to prepare lessons and then getting worried about, spending a lot of time preparing lessons, getting very worried about tomorrow's lesson, whether it would work or not. And particularly for the PGD course, that because for some lessons, there would be a supervisor coming to assess me. And for those lessons, I would be very worried. And even not for such lessons, I remember for some days I would worry so much that I couldn't actually sleep until I finished that lesson. I couldn't remember having very much support from colleagues, not in terms of work or teaching. The colleagues were relatively friendly and collegial and friendly, I would say, but we didn't talk about teaching very much, so I had to rely very much on myself. And the second area of problems for me would be relationship with students. That there would be students who, well, it's the same in every class. You know, some students would listen, some wouldn't, and I would have to try, when I cared for those who didn't learn, or I felt that they were not learning, then I have to think of more ways to help them. But I had to practice, which worked very well, which I actually learned from one of my secondary school teachers, which was to talk to students outside class. But I did it very regularly. My secondary school teacher did that, but not very regularly. I did it regularly by having my class. I was the form teacher of 3A, and so I got the students in my class to come to me every lunch hour. I lined them up by their class number, so they would come to me individually to talk to me during lunchtime. And we just talked about anything, you know, they wanted to talk about, or I asked them some questions. Basically, that's just to get to know them more as an individual, and I find that worked very well. When I first started that, the students found it a little bit funny. You know, they thought, why should I come and talk to you? What's the problem? What's wrong with me? But because I lined them up, you know, by student numbers, so they understood that that's just for everybody, so that didn't worry them too much. And after a few students, they understood that there was nothing to worry about. It's only just a friendly chat. I remember by half of it then I was on pretty good terms with the whole class, and two girls actually told me that, you know what, when we first met you, when we met you in the first class, we didn't like you because you didn't smile, and you look very serious. So we thought it's going to be a hard year, you know. But then they said, now we find that it's so different, you know. We wish we knew. And actually, now I remember what happened in the first class, because I was the form teacher. I went into the classroom with no idea of how to go about this form teacher business. I knew there were a number of sort of administrative tasks that I need to go through with the students. But then when I got into the classroom, when I actually walked into the classroom, and you know, I stood right in front of them, then all of the students stood up, and what happened was all the boys were on the first row, and all the boys were all taller than me. And I realized that they were trying to do this as a sort of message to me somehow. That's what made me, you know, straight. That's what made me not smile. And I think I have quite a good understanding of how to deal with interpersonal relationships. And I think I had the idea that in Chinese we say 管教, 先管後教, which means you managed first before you teach. And so the way I reacted to that situation when all the boys, you know, all stood up, was that I kept myself very straight. I looked straight, serious, but professional, I think, so that they wouldn't mess it all up, because I understood that once it's messed up, it's very difficult to get them all back. So I prefer to start straight, and then I have a whole year to work with them. So I knew, or I believed, that I could get their hearts back.